Buenas.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Preference Conference of the 68th edition of the San Sebastian International Film Festivals. We have part of the cast of Summer of 85. We've got Benjamin Boisson, who is with us today, and via the screens, we've got to have the director, Francois Ausson, and the other Crow actor, the other one, Félix Lefebvre. Good afternoon, Francois.
Bonjour.
And good afternoon, Félix. Okay, now we're going to start with the press conference and the questions. In order to break the ice, I would like to ask a question first, okay? I'd like to ask a question to the director, to Francois, as regards the creative process in adapting Aidan Chambers' book, because it's a very interesting discourse of the way, for example, what we take from reality and what we invent in the writing process of a screenplay, what helps us to focus and to escape from pain. And I would like to ask how you adapted the book for you and how because it's a free adaptation of the novel, it seems. Yes, it's a book that I read quite a while back in 1985. That's why I decided to make the action in that period. It's a book about teenagers and adolescents when I was 17. And I always thought that this would be a book that I would like to see adapted in film. I didn't know who was going to become the director, and I said perhaps an English person or an American person would adapt it, but it didn't happen. Then grâce à Dieu, a film which was difficult to make, I wanted to come back in a lighter frame, and that is why I read this book again, that I fell into my hands, and it surprised me because I realized that the book contained a lot of issues. This book I had read 30 years back, and these were issues that I've already addressed in other films of mine, and I thought it was an ideal moment to adapt it, an adaptation which has been quite faithful to the book, I believe. Further questions? Well, good morning, Mr. Ozon, Peter Ruud from the German TV. I would like to ask you the following. You read this book many years ago. So what is your current approach in making films now that you are you're an adult now, you're much older? How have you seen this love with the distance of time? Well, perhaps, of course, at a certain moment, I wanted to make the book my first question, but I thought I was too close to the characters. I needed some distance. And reading it again, I said, now I'm over 50 years old and my teenager years are way back there in the past. I've my greater distance and I can tell the story. So therefore I also feel much more tenderness, and of making the period at that time, the film perhaps would have been a bit much more violent. But this time that has gone by has contributed much more sweetness, and that's the element of nostalgia. And I think that nostalgia that we can feel when we see the film nowadays stems also from what's happening to us with this pandemic, with this COVID, as if that period of the 1985 was a period which was almost blessed. For example, we could live our youth again and kiss each other and enjoy ourselves in a more normal way, shall we say. Please raise your hand if you want to ask any questions. Hi. My question is for both actors, and I would like to ask you, what do you think we as an audience, there's so much chemistry and complicity between your characters on the screen. What do you think that's due to? How would you start? Yes, there is an intimacy between both of us, which is very powerful. And I think that these duos in films are made that way quite spontaneously. In our case, since we met and we read the text, it was quite natural. Straight away, it took place when we performed and portrayed the character, even when we stopped shooting and we talked and we fought between each other, even off camera. And when they confirmed the roles, well, Francois confirmed it. I thought it was great. We spent a lot of time together with Felix, simply trying to get to know each other as actors, and then knowing each other as persons as well. And the more intimacy there was between us, well, there would be greater intimacy between the characters. Something which is very intelligent by Francois is when I met Benjamin, it wasn't obvious immediately that one was Alexis and the other was going to be portray David, but there was a complicity between us. We knew how to listen to each other. We felt like working together. That was seen. We saw that straight away. And as of the moment in which I did some auditions with Benjamin, and I thought in David, well, I was already thinking in Benjamin. That is to say, it was evident from the outset, not from a physical standpoint or in the sense of how we are individually as people, but it was quite evident as a duo. Obviously, we didn't know each other beforehand. And we did a casting 3 months before the shooting of the film. We had quite a lot of time to get to know each other and to get to nourish one off the other. That is to say, so we came with a certain experience before the shoot. We started with the end scenes, and sometimes we shot things in disorder. It wasn't chronological, but this allowed us to manage and to gestate, shall we say, that complicity. And it was a pleasure to work together, by the way, as well. Another question. Hi, thank you very much for the film. I'd like to ask Francois, I don't know the novel, I've not read it. I'd like to know to what extent the novel, does the soundtrack appear in the novel, or to when have you introduced the songs were of your adolescence that you may want to think of them? I'd like for you to talk about the soundtrack. Well, I think that the film is an adaptation of the book, but it also refers to our own adolescence. The book was published in 1981, and talking with Eddie and Chambers, the English author of the book, he thought about the action taking place in the 60s, so therefore I used the soundtrack of my own adolescence, of my own teenager, when I was a teenager. For example, The Cure, the Smiths, for example, were very important. I myself lived through a very gothic period, a new wave period, and I listened to that music in English, like The Cure, and that fragment of Rod Stewart singing Sailing, this is a 1970s song, but I chose it because I believe it's a fragment that perhaps David's father would like, who was a sailor. So therefore I think it could fit in very well with the story. But it was a pleasure to go back to that period and to be able to use all of those songs and fragments of music that generate a lot of nostalgia in me, by the way. Yes, I'd like to ask the actors, did you bear in mind the decade in which the period of the film went, when you talked about that period of time, the relationships of characters back in that time, or did you just simply did not give too much importance to that? It's a story that perhaps you could tell it in any other time or in period in time, if you catch what I'm saying. With Felix, the truth is we had different points of view on that. Francois is the director, and undoubtedly he's the man he's the person who tells us this takes place in the 1980s, and all I do is to portray the role, but he has to have that in mind. And we just simply have to accept to be dressed in one way or another, or wear a hair combed in one way or another. But when portraying the characters, we wanted to be contemporary. We wanted to feel that we were in 2020, and that's the most interesting thing about the film, to see how those two universes are mixed to make a timeless film. The truth is, we felt sort of almost driven, thanks to the interiors, the dialogues, and the way we were dressed, and the music. Obviously, this drove us back to the 1980s, but from the point of view of a personal point of view of my personal work, what I did was to listen to a lot of music from that period, and also I talked to my mother very much because my mother lived in the 1980s. So, and of course, my mother knew all of those songs. She said, "Oh yes, I remember. That was that was very in fashion. That was great, and we used to dance to that music and that other song, so and so." And by listening music to the 1980s and seeing films of the 1980s, the truth is, you end up by entering into that atmosphere. It helps you. But then we carried out individual work. The text or the dialogues were already written by Francois in the script, and it's true that it is a story which is a contemporary story and universal that could have taken place today, but the story would continue to be the same and the characters would also continue to be the same.
To Ozon, please. The first one, I'd like to hear a few words about the editing process of the film. How was the editing? And the second, watching the movie early in the morning, it made me think a lot about Éric Rohmer, especially Claire's knee. I don't know exactly why, but Rohmer always comes on my mind when I watch your movies. I would like to hear a few words about the influence of directors like Rohmer to you. Thank you very much.
J'ai pas compris à quel film il a pensé. À Claire Denis? J'ai pas compris, excusez-moi. Vous pouvez me retraduire?
Je peux répéter. Je voudrais écouter s'il y a une influence.
The film was Claire Denis, Éric Rohmer, because I was le genou de Claire. That's right, le genou de Claire. Éric Rohmer was my teacher professor at the faculty at university. I loved his work, and and all the work he's carried. Éric Rohmer always appears when I make a film, because films like Pauline à la plage, Le Genou de Claire, of course. But it's true that I love films that take place in summer above all, because it's a period in time in which the characters are available, they're ready for adventure and ready for love. So therefore, it's a great period in order to film the body of actors. Everyone's wearing swimming costumes, so therefore it's very pleasant and sexy at the same time. For Francois Ozon, I liked very much how you showed and portrayed Benjamin's family. I like that very much, that family, which is proletariat, more or less, well, more proletariat, but with a certain tenderness as well. Because, could you talk a bit more about that portrait of his family? When I read the book again, I realized that, yes, I can hear myself in an echo, but I realized, I was saying, that both families were very important. The social milieu of the characters was also essential in the story. The fascination of Alex for David comes from the fact that David comes from the bourgeoisie. He lives in a bourgeois house where David comes from, the other actor comes from a worker's background, and the fascination of Alex, for example, is more dreaming in the story than living it. And it was also fun to work with the character of the mothers, who were completely different, quite maternal and very possessive, but quite different. One a bit more hysterical and a bit eccentric, David's mother, portrayed by Valeria Bruni-Tedeschi. Another, a much more introvert mother and repressive mother, with that Isabelle Nanty portrayed, an actress who I love and with whom I worked for the first time. Hi, my question is for Mr. Ozon. What was the summer of your life when everything changed? Whether you had a summer of your life where everything changed? Now we're going to find out. Come on. I think it was in 1984. And I must say that in the beginning, the film should have been called 84, but I had to change the title because when we wanted to buy In Between Days by Robert Smith, Smith said no. He said we couldn't buy it because it was published in 1985. And as I'm a Robert Smith fan, I wrote him a letter and I said, okay, I'll accept changing the title of the film to guarantee to have the rights of In Between Days by Robert Smith. So therefore, that's what I can say. Congratulations for the film, first of all. And secondly, I would like to ask the actors how your way of life and the way of seeing life from the moment you've met yourself. How do you see life yourselves? How do you see life at present after having met together, both of you, to make the film? I have not understand the question very well. Yes. Could you repeat the question, please? Yes. I would like to ask you, in the film, your characters change their way of life when they meet. Everything changes for them when they meet. What I would like to ask you, what does it mean having met, both of you met together, and how has that changed your life at present? You as people, not as actors. Yes, making the film has changed many things for both of us, that to start off with. And then when you meet an actor, that of which you think perhaps you're going to continue to work with him in the future, perhaps, the truth is, well, you say, it's great that we've met and we can work together, and that obviously, when there's a meeting of that nature, it's very exciting. But change, what has changed? Well, I'm not too sure what has really changed. This meeting, us two meeting, means that the characters and the words acquired a life before me, and it enabled me to enter into the character much more specifically through the look of Alex or David, because I had the character before me. And as we spent a lot of time together, well, unconsciously, we started to also develop that relationship between both of us, just like between the actors or the character. For example, I've never ridden a motorbike, and Benjamin initiated me in the world of riding motorbikes, and really fast. And we were able to live things that have made us gotten us closer together, as well as both characters. So there was a friendly encounter between both of us. Also very interesting as an actor, as well as a person, which has also enabled me to be much happier about my work and to realize that I can work with people from my generation with whom I've got desires of working together, and also with good humor at the same time. Okay. I'm from German radio, and for Mr. Ozon, the film, what we can see in the film is how both characters, main characters, treat themselves in a very normal way. There's no discrimination. Everything is quite evident. Perhaps you've not wanted to address the issue of discrimination. Perhaps what you want to do is to convey that feeling of normality, or the contrary. Yes, I liked that book very much when I read it in 1985, was because precisely the book never causes problems vis-a-vis homosexuality. This story was universal. It was just simply a love story. It could have taken place between two girls, two boys, one boy, one girl. No, that wasn't the issue. The issue here was how to confront two concepts of love, two characters who don't dance according to the same song. They don't have the same concept of a love relationship. And when I read it when I was an adolescent, it moved me very much. And therefore, the representations of homosexuality in literature as well in films were representations which were very negative, painful, linked to guiltiness. And in 1984-85, that's when AIDS appeared on the scene. So therefore, everything was a problem. It was a weight, a burden. But in this story, what I like is homosexuality is never a problem. And it's not because it's two boys. This story evolves towards a drama. So therefore, I wanted to be able to tell this love story in a very natural way and simple way without it being a problem and getting in the way. My question is for Francois. I would like to ask him his opinion as regards the role of the role death plays in this film. Well, I started with two concepts of love, and there are also two concepts about death. Alex, his character, has an idealization of death. He's fascinated by the Egyptian world, by mummies, but for him, death is something abstract. And what I'm interested in, when he meets David, David has confronted death because his father has died. So therefore, his vision of the world is so different. And that confrontation is very important to bear in mind. Alex later on wants to experience death and mourning. And we're talking about resilience. He manages to do that sorrow with a certain melancholy, and thanks to writing, he finds his vocation, and thanks to this story, painful story perhaps, he can make a work of art telling this story, writing it down as an author. A question for Francois Ozon, the director. A specific narrative, or leaving the moment in which the protagonists finally are going to have sex for the first time, in your films are well known because they have a high voltage sex scenes and quite explicit. So therefore I'd like to ask you whether it's something that comes from the book, or was it a conscious decision that you didn't show that. Yes, I was very conscious, obviously, very conscious of it. I did address it. We did shoot a gay Kama Sutra scene with the actors where they practice all the different sex scenes imaginable between two boys. It was fun. And when we saw it in the editing room, all we did was laugh because we realized it didn't fit in well with the story. The story is told from the point of view of Alex, who is a person who lives according to his feelings. He's very sentimental. And for me, it was quite obvious that we had to close that door and allow the imagination of the spectators and the audience to see it. If the film would have told it from the point of view of David, yes, of course, we would have seen what have happened. But as we told it from the point of view of Alex, obviously not. We had to close the door so that the audience can only imagine what happened behind the door. Time for one last question. For Mr. Francois Ozon, can you talk about your work for the construction, for the image, with the DOP? I worked with Meshama Alawi, who's a Belgian. It's the first time we worked together. And for me, obviously, we had to shoot with a film. Now, quite obviously, when I work in period pieces, I prefer film. With Franco, for example, we used it instead of digital cameras. I wanted to use Super 16 millimeter, which I'd already used in the past, a format that I like very much. Also a way of going back to that period. Obviously, there wasn't anything digital way back then. We liked the grain on the screen, that sensuality of the colors on the screen. And digital things nowadays have made images much more uniform. Images quite often have that blue and cold and clinical sort of color. But on the contrary, I wanted to go back to the sensuality of the grain you can see in the colors and the material side of things of the color on the screen. So quite often, our result was a bit blurry, but in the past, when we used 16 millimeter reel, for example, it wasn't as clean as it is nowadays. With Michel, we worked with that material to go back to the day, to that period, and thanks to the costumes and the interiors and we've been able to submerge ourselves into the 1980s to show them in the most realistic way possible. Thank you. Well, okay, let's finish here, okay? Unless Benjamin wants to tell us a story. Thank you very much, Francois and Felix, for being at a distance, and especially Benjamin for being here. Thank you very much to the three of you.
Merci beaucoup.